Cynthia? Am I? What? Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us for the Aquarium's Online Academy this morning. My name is Kaya, and I am coming to you live from the Aquarium of the Pacific in front of our Jelly webcam. That's right, we are looking at our sea nettles right now. And that is what we are going to be talking about this morning for our program is one of the most important things in the ocean, arguably the most important thing in the ocean, plankton, everyone. Did you know that plankton is one of the most important things out there? Well, if you did, or if you know anything about plankton, or if you have questions while you are watching, I would love to hear from you. That number is 562-286-1838. I have Cynthia, who is at that computer, ready to take those questions and pass them on to me. And I also have Jen here in the studio, who's going to be controlling all of the magical things behind me, and who is also our resident plankton expert. So she is going to be helping with some of those plankton things as well. And I see we already have a good morning from the DVA homeschool. Good morning, DVA, and thank you again for tuning in this morning. And of course, we're also going to be talking all about jellies. Now, does that surprise you that jellies and plankton are together in the same program? Why might that be? Why are we also going to be talking all about all about jellies today? So the reason why is because jellies are considered a type of plankton. That's right. Believe it or not, jellies are plankton. And so that begs the question then, what is plankton? How can we define that? So I'm going to define that in just a moment. I also just want to let our viewers know that if you are not watching this live, if you're watching this later, you are still welcome to get in touch with any questions or observations. Feel free to email us at live@lbaop.org, and someone on our team will be happy to get back to you. All right, my friends, so let's think about this. Plankton, what does that mean? How do we define plankton? So when you think of plankton, or when most people think of plankton, usually they're thinking of teeny tiny little things that we can't see with our eyes, right? And that's true. There is plenty of plankton out there that is so tiny we need a microscope to see it. But the real definition of plankton, and I see that Abigail is asking, what is plankton? Abigail, perfect question. We are about to talk about that. So plankton is any living thing, so this could be a plant or animal, that is unable to swim against the current in water. Okay, so once again, anything that is unable to move against the current. In fact, the term plankton, the root of that means wanderer or drifter. So we can think of plankton as all the living things out there that is just drifting or wandering about in the ocean. Now, if you're remembering those jellies we were just looking at, you might be thinking, but Miss Kaya, those jellies were moving. They looked like they were pulsing. And that's true. Plankton can move, okay? So those jellies can definitely pulse those bells and they can move around a little bit. But if a wave were to come by, or maybe a really strong current, woof, those jellies would get carried away with it, okay? So they are not strong enough to swim against that current. All right, now when we're thinking about plankton, this covers a huge, diverse group of living things out there. And when we think about them as scientists, there are different ways that we can classify that plankton. So I'm going to take a moment to define those two main categories of plankton out there when we're talking about it. Because like I said, it's any living thing, right? So it can be plants or animals. And this is the case also when we're thinking about plankton. So let's take a moment and think a little bit about what that means for our plankton friends. So I have a really great visual that can show us this. So when we're thinking about plants, the specific term for plankton that are considered plants is called phytoplankton. Perfect. So we can see that phytoplankton. And where does that term phyto come from? Well, if you're familiar with plants on land and how they get their food and their energy, they use the sun to photosynthesize, right? And that's exactly true for our phytoplankton in the ocean as well. So they need that sunlight. Very often you're going to find phytoplankton up near the surface of the water so that they can be close to the sun to get to be able to photosynthesize. And we'll be able to take a look at some phytoplankton and look at their body shapes and think about how does that help them stay close to the sun, right? And now our other type, our animal plankton, is, I'll move out of the way here, is zooplankton. Now you might be looking at that and think, but isn't it zooplankton? Is the word zoo familiar to you? What do we find at the zoo? Animals, right? So that's an easy way to remember that zooplankton are animal types, or is animal-like plankton. But in this case, we don't say zooplankton, we do say zooplankton. And we can see there's a little image there to help us remember that. And maybe that little image or icon is familiar to you. Has anybody ever seen SpongeBob? Anybody familiar with the plankton in SpongeBob? So that plankton is actually based off of a real plankton, a copapod, which is what that little image was showing us as well. I think Miss Jen is going to pull up an image of a copapod for us to take a look at. While she's pulling that up, oh, perfect. Here is a wonderful close-up, very, very close-up look at a copapod, right? And we can just take a quick look at those features here. What do we see there? Antenna, right? Kind of like a lot of insects or other animals have to help them sense things. And they have, I don't know if we can see it here, but that one eye, which is right there on the top of its head, just like our SpongeBob plankton. Now, James and Joshua have a question about jellies and how do sea jellies or jellyfish eat? And that is such an excellent question that we can spend a little bit of time thinking about. And I actually also have a sample of what we feed our jellies here at the aquarium because they also eat plankton. Okay, so let's take a look at this is our moon jelly here. That we have here at the aquarium that you're able to actually touch. We have a touch lab because it is perfectly safe to touch them. So let's break down their body a little bit and make some observations here. And then James and Joshua, don't worry, I will get to your question. All right, so we know they are animals, right? And we can see that most of their body is right over here. It kind of looks like a big mushroom. So this is what we call the bell. And this is the bulk of their body. Now, if we think about our bodies and compare it to these jellies, they're really, really different, right? We have all sorts of things inside of our bodies. We've got hearts and stomachs and one stomach, and bones and all sorts of other organs. If we take a look at these jellies, do they have all of that? No, right? They are very, very simple animals, and they are actually 90% water, okay? But they do have to eat, and they need to put it in their stomach. So when we look at them, we can see there's these four almost like horseshoe-like shapes on the top of them, or like petals is what I like to think of them as. And those are their stomachs, my friends. These jellies are lucky enough to have 4 stomachs. Sometimes I wish I had 4. If you had 4 stomachs, what would you put inside of them? What would you eat with all of those stomachs? If you'd like to share, go ahead and text me in and let me know. What would you like to eat with all of them? So how do they get the food then into those stomachs? So the next part of their body that we can sort of start to make observations about is right along their bells here, okay? So we can see 2 things. We can see these tiny little, almost like strings, and then we can see these almost like frilly-like sort of strings coming down from them. And both of those are very important for helping jellies get their food. So if you think about a jelly, you probably think, I don't want to touch it, right? Why is that? What do they have that makes you not want to touch them? They have stingers. That's right. They have stinging cells all along those tentacles. So the tiny little stinging things here are their tentacles that they use to sting their food. Now again, these jellies are drifters. They are just drifting through the water. so they really sting any type of plankton that swims by or also drifts by. So their stingers are way too weak or small to hurt us. But for plankton, other types of plankton, which I'll show you in a moment, they're perfect for stinging. And then how do they get them into their stomachs? By using those frills right there, which are called their oral arms. So after they've stung their food, they will use their oral arms to move it all the way up into their stomachs. And it might be kind of hard to see here in this video, but if you're able to look this up or maybe pause it, we can see that they do have some plankton in those tentacles, and they are starting to move them up into their stomachs. And some of the jellies in this video you can see are full. They're full of that brine shrimp, and some have not fully eaten everything. So right there I can see that they've got lots of shrimp in there. Okay, so Cynthia is telling me, thank you, Cynthia, in our studio here, that if she had 4 stomachs, she would use them for pasta, cheese, enchiladas, and fruit. I think those are great things to eat, Miss Cynthia. And Jen would like pizza, ramen, Korean barbecue, and burrito. Oh my goodness, I'm starting to get hungry for lunch, everybody. All right, well, that might be what they want in their stomachs. Let's take a look maybe at what our jellies want in their stomachs, because I actually collected some this morning, and we can take a look under our microscope to see what do those tiny little brine shrimp look like. And again, if you would like to share any observations that you are making, anything that you notice, or if you have any questions about the jellies or plankton, again, I would love to hear from you. So let's take a look over at our microscope here. Oh my goodness, friends, they are so active. And how many do you think there are? So to put it in perspective, I have zoomed in quite a lot, and I want to actually zoom out so you can see compared to my finger, so you have a point of reference. So there's my hand right here. And that's what I collected. And we can see that it is just bustling with activity there. So let's zoom back in, and we can see how concentrated it is. Oops, it's a little out of focus now. There we go. So I am told, I'm going to get back in the frame, that this brine shrimp is only a couple of days old. And so when they're this size, we'll feed them not only to our jellies, but tons of our other animals here at the aquarium. This is actually part of a huge live foods operation that we have here, because so many animals eat this brine shrimp and other types of plankton, because even though we're not out in the ocean, this is still an incredibly important food source for so many different animals. Now, Monterey is wondering, do they have a home or a place in the ocean where they sleep? Oh, Monty, I think you're thinking of our jellies. Do they have a place in the ocean where they sleep? So jellies, unlike us, are very comfortable just drifting through the ocean wherever they are. So they don't need to find a place to go to sleep at night like a lot of other animals do. One thing I do want to point out about our jellies, though, is even though they are very, very simple animals, they don't have, the faces like we have, they are able to sense light and dark, which you might find kind of surprising. So here is a look at one of our sea nettles. So that was in that first webcam that we were taking a look at. This is a close-up look at them, a local species here in the Pacific Ocean. And we can see that, even though they're plankton, they can actually get quite large. So plankton does not mean, again, anything about size. And so they are able, though, to sense light and dark by these certain, Jen, can you help me out? What are they called along the bell? Rhopalia. So that is the term for the little organs that they have around their bells here that allow them to sense light and dark. And this does help them because, again, they aren't swimming, but they do want to find their food, right? And so it'll help them orient themselves to where they are in relation to the surface. And if you want to take a moment and see what I mean, what does that mean, light sensor, Miss Kaya? So it means that they can't see shapes and colors in the way that we can. But if you were to close your eyes or cover your eyes, you might notice, well, there's still light in this room. And then if you were to turn the light off and do that, you would notice the difference. And that's kind of like what having those light sensors is like. And they also are able to detect gravity using special organs as well along their bell. So that's also going to help them determine if they are upside down or right side up. And again, if they want to be closer up or down in the ocean. So they do have sensors on them that do allow them to help sense around the ocean, even if they aren't exactly swimming in the way that a lot of other animals are. Now, Penelope is wondering, hi, Penelope, good morning. Thank you for joining us today. Do the jellies eat mostly phyto or zooplankton? That is a really excellent question. So our jellies, at least here at the aquarium, primarily eat, actually exclusively only eat zooplankton. So we feed them only that brine shrimp. And actually, if you are able to visit us here at the aquarium, we are now offering opportunities for our guests to feed our jellies. So if you ever wondered what would it be like to feed a jelly, well, you can try it out here if you are local. So yes, they do eat exclusively zooplankton. Now, in the wild, if they were out in the ocean, again, they are not exactly hunting, right? They're eating anything that drifts by. And so they would really eat anything that they can sting, that their stingers are able to stun. They'll eat pretty much anything. So I don't know if that would make them omnivores or not, but I think they would prefer to eat zooplankton. That's their primary target. Oh, and Ione says hi. Hi, Ione. Good morning. Thank you for joining us. Oh, and she is wondering, are they wondering, why are there some jellies that don't sting? Oh, Ione, this is such an excellent question, and it's one that comes up here all the time. Here's the thing about jellies. Guess what? They all sting. That's right. All jellies have stingers that they're triggered by any sort of movement that might be close by, or especially if anything touches them. Here's the thing, some of their stingers are so small, depending on what type of jelly we're looking at or talking about, that it doesn't necessarily affect us. So those moon jellies that we were taking a look at earlier that we can actually touch here at the aquarium, they have these tiny little tentacles here, and so their stingers are really small, and it isn't something that we can feel. Our skin is just too thick, so it isn't something we need to worry about. If we were maybe talking about those sea nettles, though, that would be one that we wouldn't be able to touch because their stingers are too strong. So this is an example of a jelly we wouldn't want to touch. And in general, if you ever find a jelly out there in the wild, in the ocean, you don't ever want to touch it because we aren't, sure about what the strength of their stingers are. And one other neat thing about jellies is just the family that they're a part of. They are also related to anemones and corals, and both anemones and corals have those stinging cells as well. So this is a defining feature of this group of animals. But again, we don't necessarily feel it depending on the animal we're talking about. It depends on their stingers. Oh, James is wondering, how long do jellies live for? Great question, James. So jellies really don't have a very long lifespan at all. Our moon jellies, once they reach their adult size, they really only live up to about 6 months, maybe a year or two, depending, especially here at the aquarium because we're providing them such great care. But in general, out there in the ocean, I would say 6 months to a year is probably how long most jellies live for. They do have quite interesting life cycles, though, so there are some debates about the age of jellies based on that, because in certain stages of their life, they can actually stay in certain stages for about 20 years or so. So then it gets a little bit complicated when you're thinking about the jelly lifespan. But again, once it's in that adult stage, which is called the Medusa stage, 6 months to a year, maybe 2 years tops. So not very long lived, but they are able to reproduce abundantly, and that's their trade-off. And again, even though they're such a simple animal, they've been on the planet for a very, very long time, so they've been quite successful in living in the ocean. Okay, so we have talked a lot about our jellies here and how they eat that those brine shrimp there, but I want to talk a little bit more in our last few minutes about some of the other animals out there that rely on plankton, because again, plankton is the basis of the ocean's food web. So can you think of other animals that might eat plankton out there? Well, I can definitely think of maybe small fish that eat them, and that's really important because there's lots of animals that then eat those fish, and then there might be even animals that eat the things that eat that fish. So just thinking about it from that perspective, having healthy plankton populations is really great for all of those animals that eat the plankton and so on and so forth. But there is plankton out there that actually feeds some of the largest animals on the planet. Can you think of those animals? What is the biggest animal that has ever lived out there? Any ideas? What was that, Jen? The megalodon is what she said, but nope, I'm thinking of a different animal, my friends. I'm thinking of a blue whale. This is not a blue whale, this is a humpback, but that's okay because guess what? Humpbacks also eat plankton. So both blue whales and humpbacks have very special, so first of all, these are both incredibly large animals, right? So they are thousands and thousands of pounds, but their diet is based on the smallest animals found out in the ocean. So here we go. So here's at least the shape of the blue whale that we can see here. We can just imagine it diving down to get its food. But they do eat entirely plankton. They primarily eat something called krill, which is like a tiny shrimp-like animal. And they eat thousands of pounds of it a day. So they can eat up to 2,000 pounds of krill a day, which they need to sustain them. So not only blue whales, but lots of other large animals out there. Here we go. Here's a really great look at one of our blue whales. Again, something that you can see off of our coast here during certain months. And this is the largest animal that is not only alive today, but that has ever lived. They can get up to 100 feet long. So huge animals, incredibly majestic, and very reliant on plankton for their food. All right, Ria is asking a question. Hi, Ria. Good morning. Thanks for watching. And they are wondering, she's wondering, how do they stay in water that's the right temperature if they just drift? Ooh, that's a really interesting question, Ria. Jen is nodding her head because that really brings up the question of thinking about currents and how ocean waters move as well. So I would say that most, I think, are you thinking about jellies? I'm wondering. So jellies, because they drift, they aren't going to drift too far necessarily from an area that's the right sort of temperature for them. And I would say that they are also probably adapted to a certain range of temperature as well. So, for example, those sea nettles that we find off of our coast here, the temperature will vary depending on the season. But because of that, they are, adapted to that change. So they aren't going to be able to survive in an extreme change. And that is actually an issue of global warming, right? So if we think of our climate and our whole world changing, heating up the temperatures of our ocean, that is going to impact plankton populations. And that's actually an area of huge concern for some areas, for some plankton, because, oh my goodness, so a lot of plankton relies on very cold, nutrient-dense water. Jen, am I getting that correct? And so if those areas are starting to warm up, that's going to impact, the ability for those plankton to reproduce and really survive. And again, as we're thinking about plankton being the basis of all of the food web of the ocean, that is then going to have a chain effect on all animals, really, all living things out there. So it is a very important question to be thinking about, but can the plankton really control where they go? Not really. So if the temperature in their area is changing, and it's changing dramatically, then that's not something that they can really do a whole lot about because they are just drifting. So something for us to consider, when we're thinking about how we can help the ocean, it's also about helping the ocean for this plankton out there, believe it or not. And actually, this is making me think about one random thing I wasn't planning on talking about, but we do have a couple of minutes. So we're thinking about plankton and movement, and this is actually making me think of the copapod movement because they drift, but it's not that plankton can't swim, right? They do have some control over their movement. It's just that they can't, fight against anything stronger than their ability to swim. So like fish and other marine mammals, they can really move against the current. Plankton can't, but that doesn't mean that they don't move. So our copepod friends actually have one of the greatest migrations in relation to their size. All right, so here's a close-up video of our planktons, or of our copepods. What was that? And this is from NOAA, so the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration. We can see lots of things swimming around in here. So I'm imagining all those little things drifting. Yeah, no, I see the copepods. So the copepods are the ones with our little antennas there. I was wondering if phytoplankton was the other things that we see drifting about in there. Okay, but these copepods actually will migrate to find their food, but they have a different type of migration than we typically might think of. So instead of, when you think of migration, you might think of birds or whales, and they're traveling like this, right? They're traveling from maybe colder to warmer areas along a coast, for example. Our copepods are doing a very different type of migration. They are doing what we call a vertical migration. That's right, they move up and down in what we call the water column. So when we're thinking about the depth of the water, the different layers that we think of, we call that the water column. So when we think about where does an animal live, you might say, oh, it lives in the middle of the water column, or up at the top, or down deep. So copepods will move up and down it to get their food. And in comparison to their size, they have one of the largest migrations out of any animal in the ocean. How amazing is that? This tiny little creature has, again, in relation to its size, one of the largest migrations on Earth. Pretty amazing for a tiny little animal. All right, my friends. So I think that will wrap up our program about plankton this morning. Thank you again for all of your questions and thoughts. It was wonderful to hear from all of you. We do have more programming tomorrow at 9 and 10 a.m. that I hope you will join us for. And if not, we'll hopefully see you another time. So have a wonderful rest of your day, everybody. Thank you again for joining us.